大家好, I'm Martin, and this is Short Stories, brought to you by the Taichung Keda Language Center. Today's short story is called Lucky Hans. It is number 83 on the Grimm's Brothers list, and it is not one of their most famous stories. However, I found it very interesting because it is a reverse rags to riches story. Someone goes from riches to rags. And that is why I found it humorous. It's a funny story. Well, before I begin the very funny story, I'm going to read the vocabulary and vocabulary example sentences. After the story, I will read 4 listening comprehension questions. Let's get started. Vocabulary. Valley. Valley. They built this town in a beautiful valley. Jumpy. Jumpy. My dog is always jumpy when he's home alone. Steer. Steer. The farmer bought 2 heifers and a steer. Merchandise. Merchandise. The salesman had a lot of merchandise. Take something off one's hands. Take something off one's hands. If planning the wedding is too stressful for you, I can take it off your hands. Strike up a conversation. Strike up a conversation. They struck up a conversation about the NBA Finals. Lucrative. Lucrative. This kind of work is very lucrative. Take up. Take up. I want to take up a new job now that I'm unemployed. Sulk. Sulk. My son is sulking in his room because I wouldn't let him watch TV anymore. Journey. Journey. Did you have a good journey? Now for the story. Once upon a time, there was a peasant named Hans. He worked in a gold mine in the Alps. When his term of service was over, his boss paid him his final wage, a large gold nugget. Hans was very pleased and decided to go home to visit his mother. He missed her very much. He put the gold nugget in his bag and marched down into the valley. After Hans had walked a few miles, he started to get very tired. His bag was quite heavy, and the sun was now high in the sky. A man on a horse passed him on the road. Hans thought, "That looks much easier than walking." He ran up to the man and offered to buy his horse. The man declined at first, but then Hans showed him the large nugget and he accepted. Now Hans was riding a horse like a real gentleman. A few miles later, the horse came across a snake, which scared it. The horse reared up and threw Hans to the ground. "Ouch!" he said, "You stupid horse." A cowherd who was grazing his cattle near the road saw this and said, "That's a fine horse you have. Too bad it's jumpy. Maybe I could take him off your hands for you." Hans replied, "What will you give me in return?" The cowherd scratched his chin and said, "How about this cow?" Hans looked at the cow and asked, "Does it give plenty of milk?" The cowherd smiled and said, "Why, yes, she does give a lot of milk." The two shook hands and the deal was done. But what Hans did not understand was that he had just traded his horse for a steer. Some time later, Hans became very thirsty. He decided to try to milk the cow, only to discover that it did not produce any milk. Not only that, but the cow did not like being milked and kicked Hans in the chest. Oof! Hans decided to take the cow to the nearest village and trade it for something else. He found a butcher and asked him if he'd like to take the cow. "I don't have any cash, but I do have a pig. Will you take that?" said the butcher. "Fine," said Hans, and he left the village with a new pig. After just 20 minutes of leaving the village, a peddler on the side of the road saw Hans and waved, "Hello there! Can I interest you in some merchandise?" Hans said he wasn't interested, but the peddler was desperate for a sale. "Say, is that the Baron's pig?" he said. "It was stolen last night from his field. I can tell it's his because of the mark on its ear." Hans looked at the pig's ear and said, "I just traded a cow for it 20 minutes ago. I didn't know it was stolen." The peddler smiled and said, "I'd be happy to take him back to the Baron for you, unless you'd like to explain to the police how you got the pig." Hans was worried. He didn't want to give up the pig for nothing, but he also didn't want to go to jail. He offered to trade the pig for the peddler's goose. They shook hands, and Hans continued down the road with a goose. The peddler waved goodbye with a big smile on his face. At the next village, Hans decided to take a rest next to a smithy. He struck up a conversation with the smith and learned that grinding is a fairly easy and lucrative line of work. Hans pointed at the smith's grindstone and asked, "Could I have that grindstone? I'd like to take up a new line of work now that I'm unemployed." The smith said, "What will you give me for it?" "How about that goose?" replied Hans. The smith couldn't believe that he was offered such a sweet deal. He enthusiastically said, "Yes!" Hans left the smithy with a heavy grindstone. It wasn't long before Hans was drenched in sweat. The grindstone was quite heavy. "This would be much easier without this grindstone," said Hans as he wiped sweat from his eyes. He saw a river nearby and decided to take a drink. As he leaned over, he dropped his grindstone into the river. "Oh no!" he yelled. The stone was gone. Hans felt bad, but he decided that there was no use in sulking. He continued his trek to his mother's house. As he walked, he felt better and better. "That grindstone was weighing me down. I'm glad it's gone," he said. He felt lighter and freer than he ever had before. When he got to his mother's house at the lowest part of the valley, he greeted her with a big hug. She took him inside and served him a home-cooked meal. "How was your journey?" she asked. Hans smiled and said, "You won't believe the luck I've had." Now for the listening questions. 1. Why did Hans trade his horse? A. It was too slow. B. It was too fast. C. It was too smelly. D. It was too jumpy. The answer is D. It was too jumpy. Question 2. What did the peddler tell Hans about the pig? A. It was his pig. B. It was the best pig in the kingdom. C. It was stolen. D. It was dead. The answer is C. It was stolen. Question 3. Why did Hans want the grindstone? A. He wanted a new job. B. He wanted to give it to his mother. C. He wanted to cheat the smith. D. He wanted it because it looked pretty. The answer is A. He wanted a new job. Question 4. How did Hans feel at the end of the story? A. Sad. B. Mad. C. Glad. D. None of the above. The answer is C. He felt glad or happy. Okay, that's the end of today's short story. I hope you learned a valuable lesson about appreciating the things that are most valuable to you. Your mother, that is. Always appreciate your mother. All right, thank you for watching. I will see you next time. Bye-bye.